Hi there, welcome to Quality of Life Ministries. Today's topic is going to be integrity. What is integrity? Integrity is doing what is right when nobody's watching. And so how are we going to do this? How are we going to be men of integrity? Or women of integrity? If you're a woman listening to this message and you're a believer in Christ, how are we going to be people of integrity? And that's what we're going to talk about. First of all, we live from the life-giving Spirit of Christ, not the 10 Commandments, to live moral lives. And so, that's what we're going to talk about. We live from the life-giving Spirit of Christ only, not the moral 10 Commandments to be moral. Okay, and so to do what's right, even when we're alone, how are we going to do this? Not by the 10 Commandments, of course, and we're going to find out why. But we're going to read Romans 8:6. It says, "The mind governed by the flesh is death, and the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace." That's Romans 8:6. What the Apostle Paul is basically saying there is if we live from the life-giving Spirit of Christ, there's going to be life and peace for us and everybody that we come in contact with. The option is if we live from the flesh, that's death. And I'm going to explain what he's talking about there when we talk about death. Sometimes, when we choose to live from the flesh as believers in Christ, that's called carnal Christianity, by the way. If you're wondering what a carnal Christian is, it's just a Christian that's living from the flesh, and that's, of course, self-life. And so sometimes, the Lord has to allow, permit, even cause problems when we live from the flesh as believers to push us from our will to His will. And remember, God's will is Christ. And so, remember, we were branches, grafted in the vine. Christ is the vine, and the vine life is in the branch. So the branch is symbolic to the church in Christ, and the life of the vine is Christ Himself. And so if you feel in the push, and you've been a carnal Christian, this push could be, just different things. Could be whatever you're going through right now, and you're experiencing the pressure of that. Just let the pressure push you over there to that place of rest where you learn and where we live from the life-giving Spirit of Christ. One of the problems, I'm going to read from 1 Corinthians 15:56. One of the reasons why we don't want to live a self-sufficient life or live from the flesh as believers, the Apostle Paul says that's death. There's a lot of reasons why. First of all, God's plan in problems is to bring us to the end of self-life so that we can see that Christ is our life. Remember Colossians 3:3 and 4, "For you have died, and your life is now hidden in Christ, and when Christ, who is your life, appears, you too will appear with Him in glory." Now, the verse that I was talking about, 1 Corinthians 15:56, one of the reasons why we don't want to get law and 10 Commandments mixed in our Christianity is because we're going to have to live from the flesh to observe those 10 Commandments or laws of any kind. And so what the Apostle Paul says here is, death's sting is sin, and the power of sin is the law. So if you want to stimulate, if you want to fuel sin's engine in the believer, just give them law. And if they live from the flesh, then of course, that law is going to stimulate a desire to sin. And so, remember the 10 Commandments are death and condemnation. So, just remember, if you add the 10 Commandments in your Christian walk or in your grace walk, you're going to have to live from the flesh to observe them. And so, and then pretty soon you're going to find out that you're going to try to make yourself right with God through your self-effort. And of course, that's a whole other story. That's trying to make yourselves right with God. First of all, Paul talks about this to the Galatians. Once you're saved by grace through faith, that's it. And if you go back trying to make yourself right with God through self-effort, your life with Christ is finished. and you fall from God's grace. And so that's another teaching itself. But remember, whenever we make a decision based on self, we later place ourselves in a position to be hurt. And so God's will is Christ. And so if we're living from the flesh, that's our will. And so just allow the push, if you're going through that, to push you over there to His perfect will. And so it's going to feel like this. If this is my flesh, I'm living from the flesh as a carnal Christian, what He's going to do is sometimes allow a push or a pressure to push me over here to a place where I will choose to live from the life-giving Spirit of Christ. There's life and peace there. Okay? And so condemnation, there's another reason why we don't want to live from the flesh as Christians, because if you start living from the flesh, you're going to try to get yourself forgiven through your self-effort, and you leave grace through faith. Remember, at the cross, we are forgiven people in Christ, and so we want to stay on the right side, which is grace through faith. Okay, I'm going to read 2 Corinthians 3:7. A and 9a, and this is how the Apostle Paul describes the 10 Commandments. He says, "Now the ministry that brought death was carved in letters on stone tablets, and the ministry actually brought condemnation." So he's talking about that 2 Corinthians 3:7a and 9a, and the first part of those verses, he's describing the law which was written on tablets of stone as death and condemnation. Remember, condemnation is just to pronounce guilt. And so when we leave the tree of life, which is we're saved by grace through faith, not of works, it's a gift from God, and we go over there to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, we live from the flesh, and that's death. And so remember, this is quality of life ministry, saying you are the most important person here. Remember, without you we could not teach. Remember, we're learning so we can teach, and we teach so we can learn. So remember, Galatians 5:18, those who are led by the Spirit are no longer under the law. What that means is, as children of God, we have a choice to live from the life-giving Spirit of Christ to lead us and guide us. No longer are we under self-effort. So thank you, and God bless.